All right, listen up, everybody. I want to talk to you today about having a healthy mindset regardless of the circumstances that you find yourself in. Now, the circumstances that we find ourselves in worldwide are pretty unique to our generation right now because it's probably been since early 1900s since the world's ever experienced anything quite like this on this scale. Although it's really not that big compared to a lot of the other things we've had to face, but for our generation, it's quite unique because we're asked to be stayed inside and to entertain ourselves and to voluntarily not go to work or perhaps forced not to go to work. And so a lot of people out there are left without making any money until a stimulus package comes through, and so therefore we're asked to compromise, we're asked to sacrifice, we're asked to tolerate the conditions that we're going through because, well, we don't really have a lot of other choices. And these circumstances may seem difficult, but they're not impossible. And it's important that regardless of what we think the outcome might be, where it might take us, and how it might change our lives, it's important to adopt a healthy mindset because there are no guarantees. I mean, for a lot of people, their lives are going to be changed permanently. Not necessarily their health. I mean, some people's health has been compromised, obviously. But for a lot of people, it may change the way they live altogether. They might have to get a different job because they lost the one they had. But it might open up new doors. It might change the way they live because they're not making the same kind of money. Or they might become resourceful and find new ways of doing things better and more profitable. You just never know what's going to happen. You never know what's on the other side of the mountain pass or around the next curve. There's no guarantees. But regardless of how it turns out, it's important to adopt a V for victory mindset, which is exactly what I want to talk to you about today. Now, back in 1941, we were just about at the halfway point through World War II, even though they didn't know it at that point. Hitler was ravaging Europe. He was ransacking every country he could get his hands on, and breaking all sorts of pacts, demolishing ships in every body of water that he could get his U-boats in. And Japan on the Pacific front had their own campaign going. They were in the thrust of their own campaign. So everybody had their idea of what they wanted to do with the world, and we collectively as a people, everyone else besides them, had to think up a way of how they're going to deal with it because soldiers were coming in, taking people captive, hauling them off to prisons, and sometimes completely destroying as many lives as they possibly could. So how do you deal with this when you have to go into hiding, when you have to change the way you live, when you have to leave your country, you have to leave your city, and you have to start doing things differently? When you read history and take things like that into account, this whole coronavirus pandemic is nowhere near the same. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't take this seriously. I'm just saying that it helps to read history to put things into perspective. And so while all of this might be unique to us in our generation because we've never really experienced anything quite like this where we've been asked to lock ourselves down, to quarantine ourselves off, and to be willing to make sacrifices quite like this, it's not completely life-ending. It might be threatening, but it's not life-ending. And the important thing to do is to keep a victorious mindset all the while, because it's the only thing that's going to free your mind up to be resourceful and creative and find out new ways of doing things so that you can move on with your life and keep the wheels turning. So back in 1941, there was an article in Time magazine called V for Victory. And here's how it went. And think about this very carefully because this is going to be very applicable to your life. And you're going to be able to think of ways of how you can start doing and assimilating this same kind of thought process today. So here's how it went. In 1941, this is in July that this article was released. A Belgian refugee named Victor de Lavallee first had the idea. In a shortwave broadcast from London to his countrymen, he asked them to chalk the letter V for victory in public places as a sign of confidence in their deliverance. That was 6 months ago. Last week, the world awoke to the fact that something almost as frivolous as a parlor game might play an important part in international politics. On a BBC shortwave program one night last month, a mystery voice named Colonel Britain plugged the V campaign in English, French, German, Dutch, Polish, Czech, and Norwegian. He told people how to tap it out in Morse code, 3 dots and a dash, recommended it as a signal for calling waiters, blowing auto horns and train whistles, knocking on doors. Soon that tat-tat-tat-too was heard all over Europe. The colonel told Europeans how to sit in cafes with their legs stretched out V-wise. He told them to wave to one another with the first 2 fingers of the hand spread V-wise. He told them to make the letter V with their knives and forks in restaurants, to set stopped clocks at 5 after 11. Like a fresh wind blowing in from the sea, the campaign spread over Europe. V became freedom in Dutch, victory in Czech, heroism in Serbian, and in Norwegian, Vi vil ven, which means just what it sounds like in pidgin English. First, the Nazis tried to suppress or ignore the eternal tat-tat-tattooing. Growled Norway's Quisling propaganda minister Gudbrand Lund, "Don't think you will win the war by making silly noises in restaurants." Then Germany's propaganda chief, Paul Joseph Goebbels, had what he thought was a bright idea. On the principle of if you can't lick 'em, join 'em, his ministry announced that V stood for Victoria, Nazi victory. So what do you do when the chips are down and you don't know what the outcome might be, but you want to remain hopeful that deliverance is yours? Regardless of what war you're fighting, and it doesn't have to be the coronavirus. It doesn't have to be the sacrifice of going to work and possibly not going back to a job at all. It could be marital issues. It could be any number of different battles that you're fighting. But just remember, even though we have to constantly fight a war in life, that there are many battles within. Some you win, some you lose. That's just the way it is. There's no guarantee that you're going to win every one. In fact, it's a guarantee that you're not. Let's just put it that way. But it's important to remember that you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater just because you lose some. Keep your chin up. You know, what they did here was he actually took some kind of action which really seemed inconsequential. I mean, waving each other with fingers outspread, spreading your legs in the cafe, making a V sign, and making your forks and knives in V shapes, and learning how to tap it out in Morse code. All of that seems very inconsequential, but it was a collective effort to remind one another that this is the hope and the expectation of everyone. What do you do? What do you do? What are you adopting in your own life to remind yourself that regardless of the outcome, you're going to be victorious? Well, just because one may not experience deliverance, the other doesn't mean that you were a failure and that you were not victorious. See, what the Nazis didn't like about this was that that they could see a winning mindset, because there's nothing that the enemy likes more, that there's nothing that the enemy hates more and cringes at more than a captive that he cannot break. The person who keeps a stilly resolve and a positive mindset, and you can't lick me, you can't defeat me. You might have taken my properties, you might have taken my possessions, you may even take my life, but you will never take what's up here and what's in here. The enemy hates that, because that's really what they're after. They just want to break you. Don't allow yourself to be broken. Develop a V for victory mindset. It's important to keep that in mind. And when the enemy has to look at you and adopt your way of dealing with a crisis, that's a huge compliment. Remember, that's what they did. They developed the whole V for victory for themselves, because obviously they thought it was working for their enemy. So what does that tell you? Keep a victorious mindset, guys. Learn how to be resourceful. I'm hoping that that's what all this teaches people. That's what it taught people back in those days and war-ravaged days. It taught them, even though it was hard and people were devastated and downtrodden. In the end, what happened was that there were people who fell off by the wayside, and there were others who became creative, resourceful, and inventive. But you have to be resilient. And the way to resilience is a victorious mindset. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed that. If you have, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with your friends. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.